Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of HR Tech Chat. And I'm very happy to have as our guest today, Melissa Swisher, who is Chief Revenue Officer of Socrates.ai, which is very interesting. I think it's a gross simplification to say that Socrates.ai is a chatbot. And that's where I'd like to maybe start today. Welcome, Melissa. Very happy to have you.
Thank you, Brent. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, yeah, and like I was saying, Socrates AI does. It's a very interesting tool, and I guess it expresses itself most noticeably as a chatbot, but it really is much more. Could you just explain for our viewers just a little bit around, just give them sort of an idea of what Socrates AI does, what kind of issues you solve for this sort of thing?
Sure, absolutely. So, well, again, I'm thrilled to be here and talk a little bit more about this and some of the challenges with employee experience and optimizing for it. But essentially, what Socrates does in a nutshell is, if you think about it, the world of work is there's so many different places where employees can go, right? To get answers to questions, to try to figure out what type of information they're looking for. And there's so many different systems that people have to interface with. And what we saw in terms of the problem when we started the company 4 years ago was really that, there's so many places where the people need to go to figure out, okay, where does this policy sit? How do I update this information? And so there's just this system and information overload. It's all there, but oftentimes people struggle with, well, where do I go for what? And so really at the core of what Socrates does is it's an employee experience platform, and think of it as almost a layer, right? An experience layer that really goes to where employees work, in terms of a technology that they're already comfortable with, in terms of whether they prefer to interface with a company through a chat portal, if they prefer to use text messaging or collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams. And really what we focus on is really getting people single answers versus search results, allowing them to complete any sort of things that they might need to update or take action on that goes across all those different systems and solutions that might live in the enterprise. And so if you think about it, hiding all of the noise of what people might need to interface with and making it a very simple, very consumer-like friendly user experience.
Interesting. So if I were to translate this to sort of HCM parlance, would it be fair or accurate to call this a maybe a prosthetic for employee self-service, something like that, or?
Absolutely, right? So, there's this whole notion of, right, empowering people for that self-service. But really what we want to optimize is to give people access to things whenever they need it. And whether, if you've ever been through an experience where you're looking for information, for instance, on SharePoint, it's a great repository, but if an employee is looking for something, what either happens is they get thousands of results, right, in terms
Yeah.
of what could potentially answer, or they get none at all. And so our whole idea is to break that down and make it super simple, just in the world of consumer world, right? Like think of an Amazon experience as a consumer, right? They do a fantastic job with the algorithms behind the scenes. If you're looking for a product, they'll serve up vendors who supply that product. They'll give you the reviews and they'll give you your information of who's going to get there soonest, what's the price. You don't really care about all the sausage making that goes into it. You really want to get your answer, ability to go get what you need and move on with your day. And that same thought process is what really we saw as the gap that was missing from an employee in the workforce experiences that people have today.
One of the things that just from my background in a previous life as an analyst before now, we used to look at the ROI of cloud software deployments, and that's sort of a gross oversimplification. But one thing that this makes me think of is whenever we looked at a deployment where there was a modern employee self-service solution deployed, something that 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 replaced nothing or replaced some really sort of old, clunky, not really all that useful, 10-year-old ESS or whatever, right? We would always see um, a noticeable gain, aggregate gain in productivity for the workforce, right? Because everybody's saving maybe 5 minutes here and there over the course of a day, and the larger your workforce, that really adds up. And then when you look at that as a productivity gain, and maybe you apply some sort of a correction factor to that, just to be as conservative as possible, right? Because people aren't spending all of their newfound time on something more productive, especially if it's very small chunks of time over the course of a day, right? But they are still saving time, and they are being more productive in the totality of things. With a large workforce, we'd see, we'd sometimes see a productivity gain. um, I'd have to go back to my old notes from those days, which are not right at hand at the moment. But I do recall a couple of examples where it did amount to a couple $100,000 worth for very large organizations. It just depends on how many folks you have there that touch the new system that makes things easier for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we see, with our customer base, and people that we interface with, is that, oftentimes, right, what we see happen is it's a productivity piece, but it's also, if you take a look at where people get stuck, and even if you take a look at shared services and call centers, right, oftentimes what people are calling into fall into three categories, right? So it's the, what is this, or the simple repeated questions that come up over and over again. So those repeat questions that are pretty simple but standard FAQs. The second thing is really about these how do I's, right? How do I do this? Or where do I do that? And then the third piece is really around I need to's, right? So all of those things indicate an employee's frustration level of trying to figure out almost where they go. And oftentimes the things are so repetitive in terms of what's coming in. And so really there's two parts, right? If you think about that productivity from an employee point of view, I think there was a study that had recently been done that an average employee spends 2.5 hours a week searching for information, which is astounding.
Yeah.
And the average company, over 1,000 people, have over 137 different SaaS apps. If you start to boil that down, just if you look at HR and benefits, that's pretty real and material, right? Because oftentimes, there's these great systems of record like Workday, there's great systems of record like ADP, right? Or other type of systems like UKG, or whatever it might be. And on top of it, they might have a knowledge base. And so you start to compound that, and you start to get to that place of why people are spending so much time with it, because they're not often sure where they go. And, so what we kind of look towards doing, and what we've seen in terms of impact and results, is, we look to try to avoid the call before it even happens, but also go to to the employee in a way that they like to interface with technology, right? So it's really difficult for companies. I mean, the pandemic has been a perfect example, if you think about it, of how quickly information is changing just as quickly as it's produced, right? If you think about it, well, what's the are we going to go back to the office, right? The whole notion of being able to go down to the proverbial door down the hall and say, hey, can you help me with this? It's kind of gone, right? And so people are trying to figure out ways to be really connected, right? And you want a solution that really reflects the company culture and tone that everybody works so hard to provide for people, but in a way that they consume it easily. And, even if you think about, what we've seen from some of our customers. So for instance, we have a very large manufacturing company that has about 50,000 people, and they're in 26 different countries, and they have 20 different languages. And what we did for them is we supported a big workday customer, their UKG. They have ServiceNow for HR and IT, and a myriad of other systems. And while they started the journey thinking, okay, well, maybe I could look towards using these conversational bots for each of these point solutions, it wasn't really going to solve their problem, right? Because it's that continuation of where do I go for what, right? There's the ServiceNow IT bot, there's the ServiceNow HR bot, there's the Workday bot, but nothing pulls it all together. So because people don't think linear, they don't say, okay, I'm going to ask all my payroll questions, and I'm going to say, let me do all my HR stuff, and then now let me take an idea about IT. So this notion of pulling it all together, they placed it on all these different solutions that they offer their employees, and really that idea was so what they saw in terms of impact and results within the first 3 months, they saw 60% reduction in terms of what they had in terms of the call center, right? So what that really allowed was two things, right? It allowed the people who are supporting employees with those mission critical or strategic things that they really need support with to really focus on those challenges. It's not about eliminating the headcount for shared services. It's about making them more effective. And then the second piece is also that experience, right? So, now I can just really quickly say, okay, instead of me trying to figure out even things as simple as updating your personal information, where you change your address, or for a manager to get an approval on a time off request on a text, right? Makes things simple because that pushes and pulls into those systems, but makes things super convenient. And we're seeing pretty up to 80% impact in terms of a reduction of those repeat calls within 3 to 6 months, which is
Wow.
meaningful.
Yeah, that is. I mean, you mentioned shared services, and not the idea isn't to reduce headcount, but to make them more effective, right? You have this
Agreed.
labor expenditure. You want to be getting the greatest sort of, you want to get the greatest potential value from that, right? And so there's that. You're making shared services more, potent, more formidable. Just a greater asset to the organization, but you're also improving the day-to-day work life of those shared services people around you, right? Because they're no longer dealing with just inundation, and I've looked at enough of these to know that sometimes these shared services folks are literally inundated with just tedious requests. I mean, it's nobody's fault except the systems, right? But you get employees asking, basic questions, and they're having to sort of, respond to those all day long. And so you probably improve retention in your shared services staff and all sorts of things. Can we just get into the AI part of it? And you may have mentioned something earlier, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but yeah, let's dive a little bit deeper into how the AI works with this.
Sure. So one of the things that we did when we started the company is, we had some real notions of what our strategic principles would be, and the first is that what we wanted to provide companies was a platform versus a toolkit. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, meaning that we take on all the heavy lifting for you. So, there's a lot of solutions where they'll give you a framework of okay, here's some of these intents, intents meaning that here's some of these questions, and then here's these responses that come with it. And they ask to then update it to some of those different variations, and it's a pre-found template. Now, the reality is that ways people integrate or interface with these type of tools varies greatly, even from one person to the next. And so with Socrates, we have take on all of that auto processing. That intent mapping is automatically done by us, and it's processed and continues to get better through supervised learning and the power of our customers, right? So continuing to, and we take on all the heavy lifting from that point of view. So oftentimes that can be a very resource heavy support needs, oftentimes coming, for instance, if we're talking about HR, that falls outside of HR to get those resources from, for instance, IT.
Mm-hmm.
Second piece, though, is really about we look towards supporting the IT strategy without creating any sort of limitations, meaning that Socrates, in terms of the platform itself, was built in two parts, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the actual processing engine, and then there's the front face interface, which is really what you'd call the bot. But the processing engine and where all the IP is that it was built in a way that Socrates doesn't have to be the front-facing bot. Why that's important is because we actually can assign other intents to other bots, but not compromise the end user experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it can do bot-to-bot capability, which means that from an end user point of view, they're not going to know the difference of who they're talking to. It just creates that aggregate experience itself. And the integration engine itself, in terms of the ability to integrate to all of these different systems and solutions. We have 90+% of the API connections done for HR, the top HR and benefits and IT systems. And then anytime we run into one that we don't do, it's always in our best interest to do so. So those are some of the pieces of really what we do in terms of aggregating across all those systems. So it goes beyond just a workflow. It goes across those systems too, and can auto detect whatever language they're talking, right? We support over 108 different languages, right? So from that global point of view, making it super, super simple to have that experience across the board.
108 languages. That's just about all of them, isn't it? I'm not sure exactly how many there are.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty extensive list. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, I should explain to the audience, yes, I am drinking out of a mug that has the Santa Claus on it, even though it's August. I just realized that, saw it on the screen and figured I'd just mea culpa, folks. Anyway, what do you, let's talk about the future, maybe the near future for this kind of capability in general in the industry, and maybe the not so near future. And let me share with you a couple of ideas that I have.
Sure.
With AI being infused into this, right? Like real AI, not just machine learning, although that's part of it. But with natural language natural language processing, and these sorts of things. Do you see these systems? Well, I see these systems potentially anticipating employees' questions. And stop me if Socrates already does this in a sense, at least. So first of all, does Socrates do that already, or are you close to doing that, anticipating employees' questions, or being there and maybe from some sort of an algorithm understanding what the employee is apt to ask, so that it takes less time to respond to that, because the system already knew or had a good idea of what the person was going to ask. But then moving beyond that, say you have, let me explain where I'm going with this. Say you have an employee that's, and this is all HCM centric because that's where I live and play. But let's say you have an employee that's a potential flight risk, right? They may well be looking to leave the organization, and they happen to be a high value employee. Maybe one of your warehouses you just have no clue. You haven't a clue how that warehouse will survive or go on with this particular person leaving, right? And so do you see these systems of one day maybe being able to anticipate the types of concerns and questions such an employee would have, and maybe leading them to certain types of information that might this might even sound a little Orwellian, but and persuade this person to stay, right? If you know from other aspects of the system that this person is a flight risk. Is this really too science fiction, or is that a possibility in the?
Yeah,
not too
no,
distant?
Brent, it's a great question, and just in terms of the experience with the individual,
Mm,
is so critical for employers today. So I think that, so to answer your question, Socrates, in many senses, is there in a number of those ways that you mentioned. So, anticipating what the employee is going to ask. So, in a very basic form, right? If they're saying, okay, how much time do I have? And it gives them that personalized, okay, here's how much time you have. And by the way, do you want to take any time now? So, starting to
mm,
think about, can we be proactive to what an employee is looking to do? Or also from a sense of, okay, let's say somebody's just had a baby, their
mm,
first time parent, and how do we look at that in terms of that experience for that first time parent? And there's so many different promotions, or I'm sorry, programs and wellness initiatives you guys might, the company
mm,
might offer, right? So the ability to cross promote and say, hey, did you guys know, congratulations, we're thrilled for you, can automatically ship out a gift on behalf of the company to that individual.
mm,
It can also then um, uh, it can then also push other programs, right? That they would have. Did you know we had a Healthy Mom, Healthy Baby program,
mm,
right? So those are all those different things that we can do in order to really start to promote that. But that next layer, right, of what people are looking to do is really around that personal relationship with the company and that layer of trust. And so, what's going to warm people's hearts, right? What's going to be there for them in terms of the experience that they have, right? To make it that, the company cares about me as an individual. And part of what we work really hard with our customers on is to create these cultural experiences, right? Whether that's giving them information that lives as a multimedia um, type of experience, right? So,
mm,
instead of giving them just a straightforward, policy answer, really warm their hearts in the same place with either some sort of, meme or video content in terms of how somebody might interface. And
mm,
also making sure that from the point you mentioned, how do you know if somebody's a flight risk, right? From that capacity, also being able to say, um, also to think about it from a point of view of saying, okay, here's the things that, you get records of every question and every single response given. It'll start to indicate trends, right? To start to see, are there patterns of things that would indicate that this person's a flight risk, right? And then
mm.
giving that opportunity to have a fairly strategic conversation with them to lean in to what they're looking to do, if that helps.
Yeah. So, and and you described this from a slightly different angle that hadn't occurred to me, but it's absolutely applicable. Right. This type of a system can help inform a predictive analytics setup in an HCM platform that's designed itself to help predict flight risk. So if you have even more information, yeah, it can help an existing flight risk detecting functionality be even more accurate because you're capturing information on that employee that's regarding his or her activity outside of the HCM domain of the enterprise, which is very, very key. Now, that's interesting stuff. Oh, so you know what's interesting is the idea that the AI can really help to fine tune these sorts of things. And can you describe to me maybe a situation where let's be devil's advocate here or something, is there any sort of a situation where, you know what, you as an organization, you're not really ready for this type of a solution. This is not for you yet. What can you maybe describe that sort of a consultation that you might give to somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way we look at this is it's totally a journey, right? So everybody's usually at a different place. And a lot of times where we start with customers is to try to say, okay, what's this long-term vision? What do we want to do short-term? And a lot of times what people will talk a lot about, right, especially is the quality of their content or the state of policies and the information that they're telling people, right? Meaning that things are all over the place. There's information that might be out there that will, for instance, so you have old policy. A lot of times these systems grow by add, but they don't necessarily take things out. So one of the first things we do when we start working with a customer, we do it in two parts, right? We can do it as a standalone opportunity for customers, or we can do it as it's a standard part of our every implementation. And the first thing that we actually do is we do something that we call content transformation. And we will actually crawl all of the places where policy, benefits information lives within the company, as long as the company gives us access to it, right? And then we will actually create an inventory. We'll create an inventory based on category or topic, global policy, subcategory, all those different things. And then we'll give them a sense of what that looks like. From there, we actually have an internal tool that we call a compliance bot that we run about tens of thousands of questions of the most common questions against that customer's content. And the reason we do that is it identifies out a few things. It identifies out any place of conflict. So if there's answers that overlap, right, there's oftentimes what happens is you'll see different policies that are out there that give different answers, right? Or there's things out there that have old formatting, logos. There's places where there aren't answers, especially more now than ever in terms of what people are asking. And then we create that output for the customer that we also then measure usually against their call center data. And because you want to see what kind of content or answers are we providing people versus what people are actually calling about. So we produce this whole inventory for these findings for the customer, and we also then do the content cleanup. So meaning that we make all these recommendations of here's the things we've seen. We can then also then look at things from a tone, right? Because if you've ever seen policy, it's very legalese in terms of the way it talks to people versus you and I having this conversation. And so we go ahead and do all that. So it really gives somebody a great foundation to really start to build on that corporate culture and get people what they're looking for. So we, and we kind of take that journey with the customer, right, in terms of what's most important and what's most valuable. We definitely see it grow in terms of really looking to give people those personalized experiences. And then oftentimes what you'll start to see is in the questions people are asking, they'll start to say, okay, well, my printer's out of ink. So then, or other things that live outside of what we might be supporting from an HR and benefits point of view. And then that gives the customer an opportunity to start to bring in other places of things that employees are asking about. So that holistic experience and making that front and center for where, whatever the employee needs, whenever they need it.
It's interesting. What you just described makes me think of many lives ago. I won't say how many. A long time ago, before I even knew what HCM was. So this was to give you an idea of. I worked at a civil engineering firm in the marketing department, and we helped them develop proposals for in response to RFPs, municipal RFPs. And we had this huge system. I think it was called the MIRS system, MIRS, and it was I don't recall what it stood for, the acronym, but it was an immense depository of a repository, of project descriptions and various other things, scopes of work, things that had been written, prepared by the source engineer himself or herself, or by somebody else in the organization. It was just all there. And from that standpoint, it was very helpful to have that huge archive of already developed stuff that you could rework for new proposals and whatnot, right? But at the same time, it was really tough to search through. It was very, very difficult, and it's sort of a perfunctory a perfunctory part of our job was that we would be spending a lot of time searching the mirror system for these write-ups, this content. And I just think about, 20 years ago. I think 20 years later, right? Or about, uh, that I think it's just night and day. You would probably, and I even wonder if maybe this company has something like your solution, or some sort of a similar idea applied to that system, so that their employees can be far more productive, more efficient. That to me is just, it just made me think of the mirror system, to be honest with you. As you described that, I immediately thought of my days using the dreaded mirror system. Uh, Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love this. This is good stuff. To be able to have it, and again, like I said at the outset of this, it's to say that Socrates AI is essentially a chatbot. That's very, very over simplification of what you folks do. You've done a great job of describing it, and to have that sort of a system to be able to marshal, just the information from several disparate systems, and give it sort of a central repository sort of feel to it, and to give that, give the to improve the readiness of the the availability of information. Sorry, my computer is just blowing up in front of me here with alerts. Yeah, to have that there is just, I think, a huge productivity gain, potential productivity play for any organization that elects to deploy such a thing. Yeah. Is there anything that we missed? Anything that you'd like to point out? I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. It's been a fantastic, really, really interesting conversation.
Yeah, no, likewise. It's really appreciate the time. So, you know, um, love to talk more, and but yeah, really appreciate the time today. We'll be at HR Tech for anybody who's going to be there. But no, really appreciate this opportunity, and we're very passionate about creating these memorable experiences for employees, and it's very top of mind. So, really appreciate the opportunity, Brent. Thank you.
Oh, oh, absolutely. It was my pleasure. This has been fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend, and really looking forward to making this particular podcast available for our viewers.
Great. Thanks. You too.
Take care, Melissa.
Take care.